First class sure isn't what it used to be, the voice hissed with theatrical disapproval. The man who said it wore a suit that probably cost more than most cars. His shoes were polished like mirrors, and his voice carried the entitled chill of someone used to being obeyed, not questioned. His name was Dorian Merrick, a hedge fund tycoon with a reputation for treating everyone as beneath him. Everyone, it seemed, including the quiet man seated beside him. That quiet man? Keanu Reeves. Keanu had boarded the international flight to Tokyo dressed in his usual way, simple jeans, worn boots, and a black t-shirt layered beneath a weathered jacket. No brand names. No designer tags. Just the comfortable uniform of someone who had long stopped trying to impress people. But Dorian had noticed the man immediately. The long hair. The silver cross necklace that shimmered faintly under the reading light. The soft-spoken thank you he gave to the flight attendant. It all felt wrong to Dorian. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he looked Keanu up and down. You know, Dorian said aloud, his voice coated with contempt. People used to have standards for who could sit in business class. Keanu turned his head calmly. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a depth that seemed to weigh every word before it was ever spoken. Excuse me, he asked, his voice calm and warm, almost too gentle for someone being insulted. I mean, Dorian gestured vaguely at Keanu's cross. What are you? A street preacher or something? You're wearing a silver crucifix like it's some sort of. I don't know, statement. There it was. The jab, not just at his appearance, but at his faith. The flight attendants nearby froze. One even pretended to double-check the beverage cart to avoid witnessing the moment. A few passengers looked over the top of their seats. The tension didn't feel like turbulence. It felt personal. Keanu didn't blink. He reached up, gently holding the silver cross that hung from his neck, and said softly, "Funny. I never thought kindness had a dress code." Dorian scoffed, but Keanu wasn't finished. "You see a necklace. I see my sister. She gave this to me before she passed." His voice didn't waver. "I wear it because I carry her with me. And if that makes me look like something you don't understand, that's okay." Silence fell like a curtain. Everyone was listening now. But Keanu just leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the hum of the engine swallow the moment. Dorian had nothing to say. Because in that instant, without raising his voice, without so much as a hint of anger, Keanu Reeves had reminded an entire cabin what grace looked like. Dorian Merrick sat stiffly in his seat, adjusting his collar like it could somehow erase the moment that had just passed. But it couldn't. The cabin had returned to its usual hum, but something was different now. The businessman beside him had become more than just a stranger in boots. He was Keanu Reeves. And for the first time in a long while, Dorian felt small. A few rows behind them, whispers traveled like contraband. Was that really Keanu Reeves? He handled that guy with grace. I think I saw tears in his eyes when he mentioned his sister. Meanwhile, Keanu reached into his backpack, the same scuffed canvas one he'd carried on and off sets for years. From it, he pulled out a book, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. The pages were worn, corners folded. He turned to a dog-eared page and began to read quietly, underlining a sentence in pencil. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. He smiled faintly. Fitting. He hadn't reacted because he didn't need to. His peace was deeper than the insult. But Dorian? He wasn't done. No, men like him didn't back down easily. He leaned toward Keanu again, his voice lower this time, laced with a hint of disbelief. You're Keanu Reeves, aren't you? Keanu looked up from the book, gently closing it with a finger between the pages. Sometimes. Then what are you doing dressed like that? Dorian asked, almost pleading for a logical answer. You could buy this whole airline. Keanu tilted his head, bemused. And if I did, would that make me a better person? Dorian didn't answer. Keanu smiled, not mockingly, but as if to ease the tension for everyone's sake. I fly to travel, not to impress, he said. I dress like this because it's comfortable. And I sit in business class because someone once told me not to let other people's insecurities define my journey. Dorian looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon. Across the aisle, a woman gave a discreet but approving nod. Behind them, a teenage boy was quietly Googling Keanu Reeves quotes. The plane dipped slightly as it cruised over the Pacific, golden sunlight washing through the windows. And just like that, the narrative had changed. Keanu wasn't the out-of-place man anymore. The hum of the jet engines faded into the background, but for Dorian, the silence between them was louder than ever. He shifted again, this time less confident, more rattled. The insult hadn't landed. His bravado hadn't worked. Somehow, without raising a finger, This man had disarmed him in front of a captive audience, and worse, he had done it with kindness. Dorian stared at the seatback screen in front of him, pretending to scroll through movies. But his mind was elsewhere. Who was this guy? Keanu, meanwhile, gently tapped the silver cross that still rested against his chest. His fingers brushed it like a quiet ritual, absent-minded to others, but deeply intentional to him. His sister, Kim, had given him the necklace long ago. She had battled leukemia with the kind of strength that made Hollywood stuntmen look soft. Her smile, even in the hospital bed, was the same kind that lived in Keanu's heart every day. She'd once told him, "You're not here to be loud, Kuh. You're here to be light." And today, her words echoed louder than ever. Dorian glanced sideways again. This time, his voice was quieter. "I didn't mean to offend your beliefs." Keanu turned his head slightly, meeting Dorian's eyes, not with accusation, but understanding. "It's not about offense," he said gently. "It's about why you felt the need to say it." Dorian blinked, caught off guard. I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because you reminded me of something I lost." That caught Keanu's attention. He leaned in slightly, not intruding, just listening. "My wife," Dorian said. "She passed away last year. She used to wear a gold cross. Always told me to be humble. To see people." He gave a dry, hollow laugh. "Guess I haven't been doing that lately." Keanu didn't speak immediately. He let the moment sit, like a warm silence between notes in a song. "Grief can harden us," he finally said, "but it can also break us open. The question is, which one will you let it do?" Dorian looked at him then, really looked at him. And for the first time in years, he felt the weight of something other than anger or ego. He felt seen. The seatbelt sign blinked softly overhead, unnoticed. Outside the window, the clouds parted for a moment, revealing a tapestry of golden sky. It felt symbolic, like life was offering a pause. A chance to reset. The plane soared at 35,000 feet, but something else was rising in that cabin, an invisible shift, like the leveling of ground between two very different men. Dorian no longer leaned back in smug confidence. He sat upright, hands folded, eyes distant, as if his fortress of ego had quietly crumbled. Keanu, meanwhile, had returned to his book, but the air between them still pulsed with unspoken reflection. After several minutes, Dorian spoke again, more hesitant this time. "You really don't care what people think of you?" Keanu looked up, not with pride, with peace. "I care what kind of person I am, not what people assume I am." "That's rare," Dorian admitted. "Most of us spend our whole lives chasing what others expect." Keanu set the book down gently. "I used to too, until I realized the world will hand you masks faster than it gives you mirrors." The line lingered. Across the aisle, the teenage boy who had been eavesdropping scribbled something down in his phone, probably tweeting it. #Keanu Wisdom. Dorian gave a slow nod. "You know, I used to believe wealth and image were everything. My company's worth 8 figures. I own 4 homes, but I haven't had a real conversation like this in years." Keanu smiled. "Then maybe money didn't buy you what you thought it would." "It didn't," Dorian said plainly. "It just bought me distractions." He looked over at the silver cross again. "You said your sister gave that to you before she passed?" Keanu nodded. "Yeah. She said faith isn't about rules, it's about remembrance. Remembering who we are, who we love, and what we stand for." Dorian swallowed hard. "Do you think it's too late for someone like me?" Keanu tilted his head thoughtfully. "Only if you believe it is," he said. "We all carry our own redemption. Sometimes it just takes someone else to remind us where we left it." The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles with dinner service. But the two men didn't move. They didn't need food. What they had now was nourishment of a different kind. The meal trays arrived quietly, carried by a soft-spoken flight attendant who seemed suddenly aware she was serving something more than just salmon or chicken. She placed the dishes in front of them with care, glancing once at Keanu. He nodded with a gentle thank you, his voice still like a warm hand on cold skin. Dorian stared down at his untouched plate. "You know," he said, almost whispering, "I used to think people like you were just acting, that it was all for image." Keanu sliced into his meal, not looking up. "That's the thing about acting," he said calmly. "You can't pretend to be kind. People always feel what's real." Dorian exhaled like he'd been holding something in for too long. "I mocked your necklace earlier," he said. "I tried to shame you for your clothes. But you never got angry." Keanu glanced at him now, fork paused midair. "Because I wasn't ashamed." Those 5 words landed heavier than any insult ever could. Dorian shook his head, a wry smile curling. "You're like Some kind of monk with a movie career. Keanu chuckled softly. I'm just a man who's had to bury people he loves. That'll teach you what matters. The cabin had gone quieter as night settled in. Most passengers were either dozing off or lost in their own worlds. But here, in row 2A and 2B, something unusual had happened. Two strangers had become mirrors. Do you forgive people easily? Dorian asked. Keanu chewed thoughtfully before answering. I forgive quickly, but I don't forget the lesson. He looked out the window then. The sky beyond was velvet black, scattered with stars. Vast, silent, holy. That's what grief taught me, he added. To choose peace over pride. It's not weakness. It's survival. Dorian stared at him for a long moment. Then he did something no one had seen him do all flight. He took off his gold cufflinks. And for the first time in years, he looked like a man, not a brand. This has been the most honest moment I've had in a decade, he said. And I don't want it to end when we land. A gentle chime rang overhead. The captain's voice came through the speakers, his calm tone announcing light turbulence ahead. Passengers murmured and shifted, some reaching instinctively for armrests. But in seats 2A and 2B, there was no panic, just stillness. Keanu sat with his eyes closed, fingers loosely linked, his breathing steady. Dorian watched him for a beat, then leaned back into his seat. You're not bothered by turbulence? He asked. Keanu opened his eyes slowly, gaze soft. I've learned to only react to what's in my control, he said. The rest, I give to the wind. Dorian let that sink in. For a man whose entire life had been spent trying to control the market, the outcome, the people around him, it was a strange and uncomfortable truth. But it made sense. Everything about Keanu made sense, in the way truth usually does when it's wrapped in humility instead of noise. Dorian glanced down at his watch. Gold. Oversized. Flashy. He removed it slowly and slipped it into his carry-on. Something about wearing it now felt dishonest. I judged you, he admitted. Because of your clothes, your necklace, even your silence. I thought you didn't belong. Keanu looked at him calmly. You were trying to protect something. Most anger is fear in disguise. Dorian scoffed softly. You just psychoanalyzed me in one sentence. Keanu shrugged. You did it yourself. I just repeated what you already knew. Outside, the cloud shifted. The plane rattled gently, then steadied again. The turbulence passed, and something else lifted, too. Dorian felt it in his chest, a knot beginning to unravel. Years of bitterness, loss he'd never processed. And underneath it all, a longing for simplicity, for sincerity, for meaning. He stared down at the silver cross still resting gently against Keanu's shirt. Do you wear that every day? Keanu nodded. Every single one. Not because you have to, but because I want to remember who I am, he finished. And who I love. It keeps me grounded. Dorian swallowed. What do you think she'd say right now? Your sister. Keanu looked toward the window, and for the first time, his eyes glistened, just faintly. She'd say, don't let pain make you cruel. The words struck Dorian like lightning in a silent field. His voice cracked just a little. She sounds like someone I would have liked to meet. Keanu gave a soft smile. You just did. The soft cabin lights had dimmed to a dusky glow, casting long shadows across polished aisleways. Most passengers had now dozed off or nestled into in-flight movies, wrapped in blankets and silence. But in row 2B, Dorian Merrick was wide awake, with 1,000 thoughts pacing his mind like ghosts unburied. He turned to Keanu, quieter now. Can I ask you something else? Keanu nodded. What if you realize you've lived the last 20 years of your life wrong? There was no judgment in Keanu's expression. No I told you so. Just that rare, unshakable calm he carried like a second skin. Then you live the next 20 better, he replied. Dorian exhaled slowly, almost painfully. People fear starting over, he said. They don't fear starting over, Keanu corrected gently. They fear being seen as someone who should have known better. That one hit Dorian square in the ribs. He looked down at his hands, manicured, powerful, used to signing deals and squeezing palms with just the right amount of pressure. But now they looked different. Now they looked unsure. I used to think faith was weakness, he said suddenly. Keanu tilted his head. Because it asked for surrender? Yes. Keanu offered a small smile. It's not surrender to fear. It's surrender to love. Dorian was quiet for a long time. And then, without prompting, he reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a small gold money clip. Inside was a folded picture, a younger version of him, and his wife, smiling, arms tangled in joy. He looked at it for a moment. Then, surprising even himself, he handed it to Keanu. I haven't shown this to anyone since the funeral, he said. But I think she'd have liked you. Keanu accepted the photo reverently, like he was being handed more than just paper. He studied it for a few moments and nodded. She had kind eyes, he said. And you looked lighter. Like you were still becoming. I was, Dorian whispered. And then I stopped. Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on the tray table. Maybe, he said carefully, you didn't stop. Maybe you just paused. Sometimes grief doesn't ask for movement. It just asks for stillness until your soul catches up. Dorian turned his head to the ceiling, blinking hard. There, in seat 2B of a night flight somewhere over the Pacific, a wealthy, bitter man mourned for the first time openly in years. And beside him, the stranger in boots didn't offer cliches or pat his shoulder. The plane floated high above the ocean, cloaked in moonlight. The stars outside blinked like watchful sentinels. Inside, the hush of the cabin was broken only by the soft hum of engines and the occasional clink of a glass in the galley. Dorian hadn't spoken in a while. He sat with his elbows on his knees, staring down at the gold money clip now resting loosely in his hands. His polished image, pristine suit, curated cool, had peeled away piece by piece, and what was left was human. Can I ask you one last thing? He said, voice quieter than it had been all night. Keanu turned toward him. Why the cross? Dorian asked, gesturing gently to the necklace. I don't mean the story of your sister. I mean, why still believe? Keanu leaned back, fingers brushing the chain. He didn't answer immediately. He never rushed words, not the ones that mattered. Because in a world that's noisy with cruelty and ambition, he said softly, faith reminds me to listen for what's true. Dorian looked confused. Keanu continued. The cross isn't a show. It's not decoration. It's a weight, a responsibility. Not to preach, not to judge, but to carry something bigger than myself, grace. He held the pendant between his fingers and let it catch the light. Every time someone tells me to take it off, he said, looking Dorian in the eye, I know they're not offended by the silver. They're afraid of what it represents, humility, surrender, accountability, and hope, he added, even when we don't think we deserve it. Dorian closed his eyes, almost as if trying to absorb it. For a moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Dorian broke the silence. I came on this flight thinking I was someone. You've made me realize I'm still trying to figure out who. Keanu offered a small nod. Then maybe that's exactly why we ended up next to each other. Dorian chuckled dryly. You believe in fate too? Keanu smiled. No, he said gently. I believe in moments. And this one? It's yours to keep or ignore. Dorian leaned back, suddenly exhausted, but in a good way. Not the kind of tired that comes from climbing, but the kind that follows surrender. He looked again at the cross. It suits you, he said. Keanu glanced down at it, then back at Dorian. It suits anyone willing to carry it with love.